In this program, in the series Face to Face, we're talking to Danny Spooner, who's well known in Melbourne as a folk singer. Danny grew up in the East End of London. He left school at 13 and went to work on a sailing barge around the coast of England. Later on, he worked on a whaler. Well, it's certainly a far cry from your present job, Danny, in Melbourne University. Now, can you tell me what the job is?
Well, really, I suppose I work between the history and the English departments. I'm working mainly with history, I think, but the idea to try and get the two things to work together, and using folk song just as another primary source, really, in teaching history and English.
Well, how does folk song tie English and history together?
Well, in the first place, I think, there's no way that you can teach history or English in isolation from the other subject. And folk song is just another primary source, I say, mainly because it's the only real document we've got from the working classes. And, really you've just added another primary source.
Well, since you left school at 13, you're not what one would call academically qualified to teach at university. How did you get involved in education on the teaching side?
Oh, well, it's a very long story, but I suppose really from the time I was a child I was interested in folk song, and the natural thing about being interested in folk song is an interest in history. And I've always done this. And when I came to Australia, I was asked on a number of occasions to go to schools and things like this and sing songs within a historic context. And, well, the same thing applied at university, and eventually they asked me if I'd work there.
Well, singing is a very important part of your teaching. Do you often sing in public, though?
I used to. I don't as much as I used to. I think that, or maybe because of my workload or something like that, I just don't have the same amount of time that I used to have to sing. But I think, I like to sing in public where possible.
Well, let us have a look now at you singing in the Tankerville Arms, which is a folk club here in Melbourne, and one of the very few folk clubs still left.
Way, I've got a pick and a pin, and I've got a cap and a feather, and I've got a bonny lass true, and it lives in Exhamshire. Over the same side, over the moss and the mire, I'm gonna see me lass that lives in Exhamshire. A mother loves a will and a father loves a better. I love the lass mysel and the devil I can't get at her. Over the same side, over the moss and the mire, I'm gonna see me lass that lives in Exhamshire. A petticoat is silk and it's all tied up with silver. Shoes are tied with tape. The laddie will come to over the same side, over the moss and the mire. I'm gonna see me lass who lives in Exhamshire. I wish that I was there, lying down beside a Baramus terrier whale, wherever may betide. Over the same side, over the moss and the mire, I'm gonna see me lass that lives in Exhamshire. So to hell with the buff and the blue, and to hell with the boat and the mire. I've got a bonny lass true, and it lives in Exhamshire. Over the same side, over the moss and the mire, I'm gonna see me lass that lives in Exhamshire. Lovely.
Danny, has the folk scene changed very much since you arrived in Australia in 1961?
Yeah, it has, quite considerably, really. When I first came, there were a number of extremely good singers. The atmosphere was very different. It was far smaller. Now it's much larger. There are many more singers. And the standards, well, I think the standard's higher myself. All round, generally, when I first came, there were 3 or 4 extremely good singers. Now there are lots of very good singers.
Well, what is it about folk music that fascinates you?
I think probably because it's Well, it's about people, that's the first thing. And the fact that, you know, there's no human experience that folk song hasn't said something about at some stage, you know.
When did you start singing yourself?
Professionally, I didn't start singing, although I'm really not professional at all, I suppose, but singing publicly, deliberately publicly, when I first came to Australia. But I've been singing folk songs since I was a very young child. My grandmother taught me a lot of the songs that I know now.
What about your days at sea? Did you sing much there?
Yeah, we used to, but not in the same way as it would have been done probably far further back, let's say, because of course there are radios and record players and things like that. But yeah, we used to get in a cabin and have a bit of a sing-song every now and again, but not, I suppose, as much as would have been done in the old days of sail, you see, because that was all they had as entertainment.
But you actually have worked on a sailing barge, haven't you? Do you feel any nostalgia for those days?
Yeah, I do. Well, I suppose, you know, I mean, people like Morris and Ruskin and were always sort of harking back to the Middle Ages and things. I suppose in my own way I hark back to sailing days, you know, though it was only for a very short time. It's lovely, you know, there's no noise of engines, it's, you know, wind and creaking and things like that. Very, very pleasant.
Another thing that interests me is that you worked on a whaler. Now, I didn't know if whaler was the term that applied to the man on the boat or the boat itself.
Well, it applies to both, really. Let's say a whalerman or something like that. The particular thing that I was on was a chaser, which is the one that actually goes after the whales to catch the whales. I was a steersman on that. I only did it for the one season. I would have done it for less than the one season, but I can't walk on the water, you see. I didn't like it very much at all.
Well, we do have a link with the Days of Sail here in Melbourne. It's the Polly Woodside, which is being restored by the National Trust. And we thought that would be an appropriate spot to record a song about the sea.
Oh, smashing.
As I went out one morning in the springtime of the year, I overheard a sailor boy, likewise a lady fair. They sat and sang together, made the valleys for to ring, and the birds on spray and the meadows gay proclaim the lovely spring. Said Henry unto Nancy, I soon must sail away, for it's lovely on the water, love, to hear the music play. Fair Nancy fell and fainted, but soon they brought her to. They both shook hands together, and they bid a fond adieu. Oh, Tower Hill is crowded mothers weeping sore, for their sons are gone to face a foe, where the thundering cannons roll.
Danny, you said earlier that you didn't like whaling very much and you only stayed on the whaler for one season. Well, why was that?
Oh, it's a question that's been asked a number of times, really. They're very gentle creatures, whales, and the studies that have been done on them over a period of time show that they've got a whole community sort of feeling about them. And this was very apparent to me when I was actually on the chaser, because there's certain international laws that say you can't take a whale under a certain size and things like that. You're not allowed to take a cow, which is very difficult to tell the difference between one and another. And if a cow's got a calf, she'll swim very slowly with it because the calf can't swim too fast. And the bull will swim round them to protect them, so you get after him. So it's just terrible.
Yes, and it's easy prey. They say whales are almost human in many of their responses.
Yeah, and they certainly are. It's interesting now, for example, I mean, people are worried about fishing the whale out. Well, you know, the end of the 18th century, people were worried then about fishing the north out, even as early as that.
Well, Danny, the change from whaling to an academic life is a pretty drastic one. Is it a change that's changed you very much?
I think it has, in lots of ways. I think I've learnt a lot. I remember there's a professor at Melbourne University, Ian Maxwell, who's been terribly important to me, and I remember when I first went there giving a scathing lecture attacking academia, and a couple of weeks afterwards I met Ian for the first time, and he asked me a question which he could very easily have asked me at the time, and the question was actually, I'd been talking about the ballads as being taught only as literature, and he said to me afterwards, you know, who named the ballads? And I didn't know. You see, so that in that way I've changed a great deal. I hope I've broadened enough to sort of say, well, you know, there are many ways that you've got to look at things.
And mellowed a bit.
Well, yeah, I think age might have something to do with that.
Danny, what about the future in education? Can you, are there many changes that you'd like to see?
Oh, I think anybody who teaches would like to see changes. Yes, I think the major change I'd like to see is a change that would take away this business of the piece of paper being the be-all and end-all. I think it would have a number of effects, but the most important effect I think that it would have would be that students would then start to study, to enjoy study, you know, for something that goes on in here, rather than something that is handed to you, you know, at the end of it all.
And is it possible, really, to learn as much about history from folk music as from more conventional styles of lesson?
I don't think you learn any more from folk music than by anything else. I think all it is, as we said at the beginning, really, it's another primary source. It's an added thing, and anything which adds to our knowledge about history and whatever, literature or something, is good, and this is just an added one, really.
Thank you very much for talking to us today, Danny, and I wondered, to close the programme, could you perhaps sing us a song which tells us something about Australian history?
Yeah, well, The Streets of Forbes is a sort of song that we can learn something from. It's an Australian song which deals with the death of Ben Hall. It was supposedly written by a man called Bill Maguire, who was a relative, some sort of relative of Ben Hall's. And he used the form of the old Irish "Come all ye." Seems that he was most upset by the fact that after the police had caught Ben Hall, they paraded his body through the township of Forbes. So he wrote this song and called it The Streets of Forbes. Come all you Lachlan men, and a terrible tale I'll tell, concerning of a hero bold, who through misfortune fell.
His name it was Benno, a man of great renown, who was hunted from his station and like a dog shot down. 3 years he roamed the road, and he showed the traps much fun, and £1,000 was on his head with Gelbart and John Dunn. Ben parted from his comrades, the outlaws did agree that they'd give away bush ranging and cross all the briny sea. Penny went to Kubang Mick, but that was his downfall, for riddled like a sieve was the valiant Benno. Till early in the morning, all on the 5th of May, that the troopers gathered round him, as fast asleep he lay. Billy Daggin, he was chosen to shoot the outlaw dead, but the troopers fired madly and filled him full of lead. They rolled him in a blanket and strapped him to his prad. Then they led him through the streets of Forbes to show what a prize they had.